Hey there, I'm Reverend Dan. We are the Soul Evolution Collaborative, and this is Stripped Down Sunday, where we unchurch your Sunday experience. Welcome. We are thrilled to have you here this time with us to offer some inspiration, some spiritual upliftment, and hopefully a new take on life in a uniquely Soul Evolution Collaborative kind of way. We have stripped down Sunday mornings to offer you a streamlined experience that fits your needs. We have this strong desire to bring an updated message of inspiration to the world at a time when we all seem to maybe need it the most. The Soul Evolution Collaborative is dedicated to personal transformation and communal evolution. So, two very quick logistics. Everything that you could possibly want to know about the Soul Evolution Collaborative, I hope, can be found at soulevolutioncollaborative.org. That link is on the screen, and I believe it will also make it into the chat. So feel free to open up our website in another tab, poke around while we're here. There is life-changing information available to you there. Second, it is communities with missions like ours that actually bring change to the world. We are actively creating a new earth, new ways of life that benefit everyone. So if you are in any way able to help continue this mission, we gratefully welcome your support. Donations can be made at soulevolutioncollaborative.org. There is a donate button in the menu. It should be real easy to find. So let us jump into the message for this week. This month, we are celebrating light. We're celebrating light in a whole bunch of different ways all month long. And that looks like a couple of different things. It looks like what we are calling the 31 Expressions of Light, celebrating 31 Expressions of Light. That is a month-long celebration. We are live every night for just a few minutes with a word that expresses light in a very unique way. We are celebrating in daily activities. This might also look like Truth Be Told episodes, our weekly Tuesday video that dives more deeply into some of those expressions. So yes, a little plug for all of the things that we do, but that we certainly are celebrating light all month long and in a lot of different ways. What this doesn't often look like, what celebrating what celebrating light doesn't always look like, is recognizing the darkness. What, after all, would light be without darkness? It's kind of an interesting question. And so light and darkness, outside of the realm of spirituality or religion, tend to go hand in hand. We usually think of them together. And sometimes, maybe even within religion, light and darkness are hand in hand. But I think in New Thought in particular, and in Science of Mind, we very often talk about the light and don't often talk about the darkness. So it is interesting to note then that the origins of celebrating light at this time of year are actually because of the darkness. And there are maybe cultures around the world or throughout history that celebrated light out of fear that in the darkness, in these darkening times of year, that perhaps the light wouldn't return, or myths got created this way. And yet we know that light and life operate in cycles. And so as the darkness begins to come upon us, that it will also cycle through and the light will come back. But it certainly the darkness becomes this reminder of the light for us. And so when we celebrate light, we have to then also incorporate, or we should, maybe we don't have to, it would behoove us to then also recognize the darkness, that what role does darkness play in celebrating the light? As a kid, I was thinking about this earlier, that as a kid, being afraid of the dark was equated with weakness. And I don't know how exactly this came about. It wasn't like this was directly told to us, but certainly was this mutual understanding as kids that to be afraid of the dark equaled weakness. There were subtle messages throughout society that you have to overcome your fears and beat your fears. You need to be strong. And so to be afraid of the dark would be to not be these things that society said you need to be. which is really interesting because when we look at that, to be afraid of the dark, well, what's interesting first, I think, is that this idea of fear itself has kind of become this naughty word, like to have fear, like, oh, we're not afraid of anything, we're American, or we're strong, or we're whatever, whatever context we want to put that in. This idea of fear itself has kind of taken on this naughty word kind of imagery that, like, we're not supposed to be afraid of anything, right? And that's just not true. So maybe this is the first time you're hearing that. It is not true. There are fears hardwired into us for good reasons, and some of that's just evolution in history. But some of it, like, is not actually fear, but maybe with the dark, we are unsure of the dark. Our brain doesn't like uncertainty, and so to look at the dark, to be unsure of what is in the dark, is probably not actually a bad thing. And if we look at history and fear and how our brains are wired, that's simply a protection, a method of protection, to not wander away from the campfire off into the dark where you can't see because it might be unsafe. So we are wired to be mindful of the dark. However, what has happened is this uncertainty of the dark, combined with these societal implications of weakness, has actually created a fear of the dark. We are fearful of what it might mean to be afraid of the dark, which is kind of this weird twist on, we were unsure of the dark, and society says we should be fearful of the dark. So now we are afraid of being weak, which turns into a fear of being afraid of the dark, which is kind of crazy, and it's very subconscious, but it creates this very twisted, never-ending cycle of fear around the dark. And really, it is not the darkness itself that there is anything to be afraid of. It's not being able to see. It is this idea of believing so much in what we see, or not believing in what we don't see, is what brings us this uncertainty of the dark. And so what is really interesting about that is the global theme for the Centers for Spiritual Living this week has us talking about surrender as action. Surrender is action. And so we are choosing to follow these global themes, and it is falling very nicely into the themes that we are talking about outside of Sundays anyway. So this idea of surrender, what's really interesting is that as a kid, similar to the fear of darkness, surrender had a lot of those similar qualities. That the word surrender was a bad word as a kid. That surrender was like, you're playing, oh God, games we would not even call or name anymore. You're out in the backyard, cowboys and Indians, right? I mean, this is, certainly not, we would certainly not play that anymore, right? But anyway, back in, like, it was that mentality, that this ignorant mentality where surrender in those kinds of games, surrender was weakness, to lose, to give up, to fail. Surrender was failure, was giving up. Surrender was, you are not good enough. That was the message of surrender. There was so much of this fear of less than around the idea of surrender, so much like there was around the idea of being afraid of the dark as a kid, right? That we took on this baggage of surrender. And so when we bring up this idea of spiritual surrender now, years later as adults, when we look at this idea of surrendering, there is a lot of baggage to shed, much like there is a lot of baggage to shed around this idea of darkness. That the baggage we took on as kids, we brought with us into adulthood, the history of certain words. And so when we celebrate light and we recognize the darkness, or celebrate light and maybe don't recognize the darkness, is usually because we have such a history with this word of darkness, that to recognize the dark, that there's such a negative stigma around the darkness, that we tend to not even look at it. And yet there is such great growth available to us in darkness. And the same is said with surrender, that we we tend to shy away from the idea of surrender, even in spiritual communities, because of this history that we have brought along with us around surrender. So especially to those of us as practicing metaphysicians, we can recognize that there is this very deep connection between surrender and darkness. They're actually directly connected on a lot of different levels. Many different levels. So Jesus, who I tend to say I don't reference often, but it seems I'm saying that a lot recently, so maybe I do. Jesus very often referred to the upside down kingdom. This idea that what we think we know about life might actually be the reverse of what is universally true. And what seems true here in this life is perhaps actually the opposite of what we might call ultimate reality, right? That consciousness that exists beyond time and space, outside of however we want to term that doesn't aptly actually describe whatever that totality of consciousness is. What seems true here is, in a lot of ways, opposite of what is true there. And certainly not ironically, that plays very much into this idea of light and darkness as opposites, right? That the world of light is very opposite of the world of shadow. And we'll get into that in a second. So this realm of form, so this is one of the ways that this shows up. In this realm of form, the world that we exist in, where form is solid, where thoughts take on actual physical form, where life is created and we knock on a wall and it feels solid, right? Darkness exists here, and we introduce light into it. So darkness is a thing in and of itself. Scientifically, darkness exists, and we shine light into the darkness to illuminate it. Whereas in the realm of consciousness, light exists, and we have, in fact, introduced form into the light, and the form is what casts shadows to create darkness. So light is everywhere until form takes shape and creates shadow in this realm. So we have these two very opposite positions. And what is really interesting about this is that these two realities are not actually separate in any way. They seem like they are opposite and opposing, and that they couldn't exist at the same time. And yet, in reality, in the truth of reality, reality with a capital R, these ideas are only as separate as we believe them to be. Both the reality of form, all of the rules and laws and science of physical form in front of us, the way we are taught most often to perceive life, is true. And the way that the realm of consciousness shows up, which seems to be the exact opposite of that, is also true, because these are the mirror images of each other. And so what this really means for us then, and this is, if we take one thing away from this message today, it is that until we realize that we are 100% the light with a capital L, then we continue to cast shadows. Until we realize we are 100% the light, then we continue to cast shadows. That in this realm of physical form, we are actually the things that are casting the shadow. We are the things creating that which puts other things into darkness. Because light is all that there is. And if light shines everywhere and is all that there is, the only thing to interrupt that is some sort of form. We actually build and construct things that interrupt that light and cast shadows. I'm actually looking out my window at this very moment at how the trees and the houses and the fences are casting shadows, that the light wants to shine on everything. And yet we have these things, and even beautiful things like nature and trees is casting a shadow, so that light is no longer shining in that one place. And because of our history of darkness, I immediately go to the place of, well, that's bad. This tree has cast a shadow and light does not shine in that place, and somehow that is a bad thing. But why do I think that? Why is that actually true? Why do we think that is true? Other than we have this history that there is this fear of that which is in the darkness. And yet the shade of a tree is a beautiful place if you've ever been in the desert. So that the shadow is not a bad thing, is not a bad place. That which is in shadow is not negative. And so in this same vein, we look at surrender. And to undo some of surrender, first, I think we have to look that surrender is an active verb, meaning it is consistent. It is constant. To surrender is to consistently be in the process of surrendering. Surrender is an active verb and requires a conscious choice to move from control into relaxing into this idea of divine order, that there is this light and this thing that is shining this light with a capital L everywhere. It is available everywhere. And it is a matter of giving up control in order to step into this idea of surrender. There's a couple of levels of surrender. First would be giving up control, letting go of that which we think we need to have control over. Where in my life do I feel like I need to control the outcome of how this shows up? The next level would be naturally giving up fear, because why do I need to control this thing? Well, there is a fear that if I don't control the outcome of this specific event, something very bad is going to happen. So letting go of control, and then giving up fear. Well, if we give up fear, what are we giving up to or giving up towards? And that simply is embracing faith. To give up fear is to embrace a faith that there is something greater than that fear, that there is a truth that counteracts what we might be fearful of. And these are all active. We are consistently, because of the nature of life, we are consistently in a position where we are looking to give up the control of expected outcomes. We are looking to give up fear and looking to embrace faith of that flip image, that mirror image of how we have come to believe this life works. Embracing the faith of that, what is on maybe the other perspective of how we have come to see life, that upside down kingdom. And again, that these are active means of surrendering. It's not giving up control once. It's not giving up fear once. It's not embracing fear once. It is a moment to moment thing. And it's a progress. And so essentially we have a choice in every moment, a choice between faith in form or faith in consciousness. And as long as there is faith in form that is greater than a faith in consciousness, we continue to cast shadows that throw others into darkness. So when we place our faith in consciousness, ironically, that which we cannot see, you see, while we might not be able to see what is in the dark, darkness itself is something that we can see, right? So we have this faith in the darkness that it is scary. So when we place our faith in consciousness and we trust what we can't see, because we have come to love to trust what we can see. When we are able to trust what we can't see and we put our faith in consciousness, we actually become the light. We are form as light. And what more meaningful of a way to live life than that, to actually become the light, the thing that as form doesn't cast shadow. And yet there is such a perfection to that shadow, which we'll touch on in a moment. But every moment that we show up as light is a moment that we illuminate that which is in front of us. And what's interesting about this is we are not, in fact, illuminating ourselves, which I think very often we are trying to do. We are trying to use principles as a means of illuminating ourself, our own life. But the reality is we are actually illuminating the experience of others. Illuminating the path of others is actually the byproduct of understanding what it means to really be the light. That to illuminate, to shine this light, to shine light on what was previously shadow is not the thing we're trying to do. What we're doing is simply understanding ourselves, putting faith in our consciousness, And what happens because of that is we begin to shine light on the world around us, on that which is in front of us. And so this really isn't about illuminating our own experience. In reality, to attempt to illuminate our own path is to actually not understand light. It is putting faith in form. It is to believe in an experience of separation in that moment. And this is something we all do regularly. So this is not in any way a judgment or to put down anyone, but simply being in the place, being in the shadow. We feel like we are needing to illuminate the shadow rather than lifting ourselves up into this faith in consciousness and the all that there is. And so to understand the light, that which actually lights the shadow, is being in that place of faith, not trying to create a light. That the light is actually the byproduct of doing the work, of being this illumined way. And life has really created this rather brilliant system that in which all of this plays out, because I think we so quickly go to that idea of casting shadow is bad, and anything in shadow is a negative thing, is a negative experience in our life that we're trying to do away with. And simply by even becoming the light, it almost sounds like we're reinforcing that idea that shadow is this negative thing. But there is this balance. There is this balance between light and shadow, and it is this amazingly brilliant system. The all that there is only light. And so for us to try and create a world and an experience here that is only light would be to negate the idea that light, life, God, the all that there is, created this experience, this world, this universe, to have this experience. So to try and create only light here would be to try and undo this, all the creation of the all that there is in the form that it shows up. So in reality, how this plays out is that the shadows that we cast in front of us, while casting shadows on others, it actually also becomes the means for life to mirror back to us, to show us what it is that we are putting out in the world. So our shadow actually creates the very experience that points us toward the light. And so in a world of form being the thing that interrupts light to create shadow, the shadow that the form creates is the thing that reminds us of the light. So we are here in this world of being so that we can remember what the light is like and how light plays out in a world that was created specifically with the means of creating shadows. So life itself creates, simply by existing, the shadows that we see, what we would call darkness. Right? Light exists and form is introduced into that light and creates a shadow, rather than the other way around, the opposite way of thinking, where darkness exists and we introduce light. Here, light exists and we introduced form. We introduce something that blocks the light and casts shadow. So light exists, form exists, shadow exists, and all of this is as real as we believe it to be. All of this is here to simply show us and remind us the nature of light itself. But light, being the thing that was there first, is what all of life is pointing us back to. So let's recap real quick. Light exists, life exists, life creates shadow, shadow points us back to light. The way we move through this process is by surrendering actively to this idea, in a moment-to-moment basis, that we are actually that light itself. And so by being pointed to the shadow that is in front of us that we cast, we are reminded then of a higher way of being, a more desirable way of being, a more forward-moving and creative way of being, that we actually let go and surrender to the faith of this light that is the all that there is. And in doing so, we actually become that light, and therefore create more light in the world in places where there was only shadow. So we actually become the thing that defies the possibly laws of physics. I don't know if we actually become a shining physical beacon of light, but to be that place of light with a capital L that other people recognize as a an illumined way of life, points the way for other people. So not only do we, by surrendering and placing our faith in that which we cannot see, not only do we become an enlightened way of being, but we point that way and shine that way for other people. And so we must surrender to that which we cannot see. We must work moment to moment, as often as we remember, for a faith in the invisible greater than our faith in form, which is not always easy. So luckily enough, this is not mine, but I love it so much I wanted to share with all of you that there is, with our global theme came 3 steps to practice the presence. This is this practice of stepping into faith. The 3 steps are: reflect about personal control. What do we have control over? What fear do we have? And fear not with the baggage and the history, but fear that we all have fears. What is it that is in our life that we are trying to control because we have some fear of, if this, then this, or if not this, then this. Ego as edging God out. Think of the effect on ourselves when we try to have control over something or someone. So step 1, reflect about personal control. Step 2, let God in more deeply, or universal presence, divine love, truth, spirit, whatever you want to call it. Let the all that there is, let that in more deeply. When we become still and listen long enough, we will hear the voice of the heart. Are we willing to be still long enough to wait, to move away from the surface of our mind, of our lives, of the busyness? Let God in more deeply. And then step 3, live from faith and surrender to our divinity, our essential nature. Follow that inner guidance more and more. It can be trusted, moving into action from truth within. This movement can truly only be authentic when it shows up in the world outside of us. The greater that movement, the greater the circumference of the circle. So these 3 steps: reflect about personal control. What are we trying to control? Let God in more deeply, listen long enough to hear what the world is saying to us, and live from faith, surrender. So when we do these things, again, it all comes back to surrender, but surrender as an action, as an activity, a consistent and ongoing growth, progress towards a consistent release of the need for control, of choosing to put our faith in that which we cannot see instead of that which we can see, and a consistent desire to bring more light into the experience of those around us. Surrender is an action. And until we realize that we are 100% the light through surrender and faith, then we continue to cast shadows. So surrender into being the light as often as possible and be part of creating a new world that works for everyone.